On September 14, 2022, a fingerprint appeared inside a sealed evidence bag. That shouldn't have been possible. The bag had been logged, photographed, sealed, stored, and untouched for nearly a year. Yet the print belonged to a man who had been dead for 8 months. Not missing, not presumed dead. Dead. His death certificate had been signed. His funeral had been held. His body had been identified by family members. Everything about his death had been documented, which is why Detective Ryan Mercer stared at the fingerprint report for nearly 10 minutes before saying a single word. Because either the laboratory had made a mistake or something much worse had happened. The report sat on his desk that morning. 1 page, 1 name, 1 fingerprint match. At the top of the page, Machich Confidence, 99.98%. Below it, Jonathan Reed. Ryan knew the name immediately. Most detectives in the department did. Not because Jonathan Reed was famous, because 8 months earlier, his death had become one of the most publicized cases in the city. 34 years old, former financial analyst, no criminal record, no known enemies, married, 1 daughter, a life that looked completely ordinary until January 3rd. That morning, hikers discovered Jonathan's vehicle abandoned beside a remote access road outside Columbus. The driver's door was open. His wallet remained inside. His phone was gone. At first, investigators assumed he had walked away. Then search teams found blood. Not much, just enough to trigger concern. 2 days later, a body was recovered from a quarry nearly 12 miles away. The medical examiner identified the remains as Jonathan Reed. The cause of death was ruled blunt force trauma. The case remained unsolved. No arrests were made. No suspects identified. Eventually, public attention faded. The file moved quietly toward becoming another cold case. Until September. Until the fingerprint. The print had been discovered during a routine evidence audit, a process so boring that most detectives hated participating in it. Every 6 months, sealed evidence was reviewed to verify storage records. Nothing exciting ever happened. Boxes were counted, seals were checked, paperwork was signed. Then everyone went home. At least that was the plan. Evidence technician Melissa Grant was reviewing a sealed bag connected to a recent burglary investigation. The case itself was unremarkable. A jewelry store robbery. No injuries. No major suspects. Nothing that should have attracted special attention. Melissa scanned the exterior of the evidence bag before returning it to storage. The scanner flagged a latent print. That wasn't unusual. Evidence bags often carried fingerprints. Investigators handled them all the time. What was unusual was where the print appeared. Not outside. Inside. Between the evidence item and the sealed plastic. Melissa assumed it was contamination. Then she ran the print through the system. 3 minutes later, the computer returned a match. Jonathan Reed. At first she laughed. Then she checked again. Same result. She ran the search a 3rd time. Same result. By the 4th search, nobody in the laboratory was laughing anymore, because the match wasn't changing. And neither was the problem. Jonathan Reed had died 8 months earlier. The evidence bag had been sealed only 3 weeks earlier. Somehow his fingerprint existed where it physically shouldn't. By lunchtime, Detective Ryan Mercer was assigned to investigate. Initially, he expected the explanation to be simple. Lab contamination, database error, improper handling, something ordinary. Those expectations disappeared within 48 hours. The first thing Ryan did was review the chain of custody. Every person who touched the evidence, every location, every transfer. Nothing looked suspicious. The evidence bag had remained under surveillance from the moment it entered police custody. No gaps, no missing footage, no unauthorized access. Then Ryan examined the seal, still intact. No signs of tampering, no evidence of replacement. Forensic specialists confirmed the same conclusion. The bag had never been reopened. That should have ended the mystery. Instead, it made it worse, because now investigators had 2 verified facts. The fingerprint was genuine. The seal was genuine. Both couldn't be true at the same time. Yet every test said they were. The deeper Ryan looked, the stranger things became. Jonathan Reed had no connection whatsoever to the burglary case. Different city, different people, different timeline. Nothing linked them. The fingerprint appeared completely random, almost as if Jonathan's name had been pulled from a hat. Then a forensic analyst made a discovery that changed everything. The print wasn't recent, at least not in the way investigators expected. Chemical degradation suggested the fingerprint had been transferred before the evidence bag was sealed, not after. The room fell silent when the report arrived, because if that was true, Jonathan's fingerprint existed on the evidence before it entered police custody, which created a terrifying new question. How? The jewelry store burglary occurred 7 months after Jonathan died. There was no possible way for him to have touched evidence connected to a crime that hadn't happened yet. Ryan spent nights staring at timelines, trying to force the facts into something logical. Nothing fit. Every explanation created another contradiction. Then the burglary suspect was identified. His name was Marcus Hale, 26 years old. Prior arrests for theft. Nothing extraordinary. Ryan interviewed him personally. The conversation lasted less than 30 minutes. Marcus denied everything. Denied the burglary. Denied knowing Jonathan Reed. Denied ever hearing the name. Ryan believed him, not because Marcus seemed honest, because he seemed genuinely confused. Most suspects become nervous when detectives mention unfamiliar names. Marcus didn't react at all. The name meant nothing to him. That should have been another dead end. Instead, it led to the first real breakthrough. Investigators searched Marcus's apartment. Inside, they discovered stolen property linked to multiple robberies. Nothing surprising. Then they found a key. Small. Metal. Unmarked. At first, nobody understood its significance, until Ryan ran the serial number. The key belonged to a private storage facility, 3 miles from where Jonathan Reed's abandoned vehicle had been found. The coincidence bothered him immediately, not because it proved anything, because coincidences kept appearing around Jonathan's case. Too many of them. The storage unit was opened the next morning. Inside sat ordinary items. Boxes. Old furniture. Documents. Nothing valuable. Nothing suspicious. Then investigators discovered a locked filing cabinet. The key wasn't present. The cabinet had to be forced open. Inside they found dozens of folders, each labeled with dates, each containing surveillance photographs, phone records, financial documents, movement logs. Ryan felt his stomach tighten, because all the folders tracked different people, different names, different occupations, different neighborhoods. Someone had been watching them, studying them, for years. Then Ryan opened the final folder and immediately stopped breathing. The name on the cover read, Jonathan Reed. The folder was thicker than all the others combined. Hundreds of pages, photographs, receipts, schedules, location histories, detailed notes. Some entries went back nearly 4 years. Jonathan hadn't been randomly selected. Someone had been obsessively documenting his life, long before his death, long before investigators even knew he existed. And buried near the back of the folder, Ryan discovered a photograph that would completely change the investigation, because the image showed Jonathan Reed standing beside another man, a man detectives recognized instantly. The problem was that man was supposed to be dead too. Ryan stared at the photograph. For several seconds, he thought he was looking at the wrong file. Then he checked again. Same face, same person, same impossible problem. The man standing beside Jonathan Reed was Daniel Mercer. No relation to Ryan, just coincidence. But Daniel Mercer's name was familiar throughout the department. 5 years earlier, Daniel had been the central figure in another unsolved investigation. Officially, he had died during a boating accident. His body was recovered from a reservoir 60 miles away. The death had been ruled accidental. Case closed. Yet here he was, standing beside Jonathan Reed, smiling directly at the camera. The photograph's timestamp showed a date nearly 2 years after Daniel's supposed death. Ryan immediately requested the original file. Forensic analysts verified it within hours. The image was authentic, not edited, not manipulated, not AI-generated. Real. That single photograph reopened 2 closed investigations simultaneously, and suddenly the fingerprint no longer seemed like the biggest mystery. The question became far more disturbing. Who exactly had Jonathan Reed been? Because every new piece of evidence suggested investigators never truly knew. Over the next week, detectives re-examined Jonathan's life. This time they ignored the version everyone thought they understood: the husband, the father, the financial analyst. Instead, they focused on the years before his death. What they found changed everything. Jonathan had quietly maintained a second identity, not a fake name, not another family, something stranger. For nearly 4 years, he had been working as an unpaid source for a private investigative network, not law enforcement, not licensed investigators. A loose group of former analysts, journalists, fraud specialists, and cybersecurity researchers. Their purpose was simple: track people who vanished from official records, people declared dead, people declared missing, people who, somehow, continued appearing in places they shouldn't. At first, Ryan assumed the group was conspiracy-driven nonsense. Then he reviewed their files. The work was meticulous, verified, professional, and deeply unsettling, because many of the people being tracked had something in common. Their deaths were real. Their bodies had been identified. Yet evidence kept surfacing years later, suggesting they remained connected to ongoing criminal activity. Most of the files led nowhere, but 3 names appeared repeatedly: Jonathan Reed, Daniel Mercer, and a third individual named Victor Kane. Ryan had never heard of Victor Kane. That changed quickly. Victor Kane disappeared 12 years earlier. No body recovered, no official death, no confirmed sightings, nothing. Yet his name appeared throughout the surveillance files, over and over, sometimes highlighted, sometimes circled, sometimes accompanied by a single handwritten phrase: "Find DHE archive." Nobody knew what that meant. Then another breakthrough arrived. Investigators finally traced the storage unit rental, not to Marcus Hale, not to Jonathan Reed, to a shell company. The company had no employees, no active business, no operating address. Yet financial records revealed monthly payments stretching back 11 years. Someone had been funding the unit for more than a decade. Without interruption, Ryan followed the money. The trail eventually stopped at a trust fund established by Victor Kane, the same Victor Kane who supposedly vanished 12 years earlier. The case was no longer strange. It was becoming impossible. Meanwhile, forensic teams continued studying the fingerprint. The answer arrived from an unexpected direction. A specialist noticed microscopic residue trapped beneath the print. Not enough for DNA, but enough for chemical analysis. The residue contained trace compounds used in evidence preservation materials found only inside police storage facilities. The room went silent, because the implication was obvious. Jonathan's fingerprint had not come from a crime scene. It had come from evidence, old evidence, evidence connected to another case. Somehow, Jonathan's print had been transferred from one investigation into another. But how? Ryan ordered a complete review of archived evidence connected to Jonathan Reed. Days later, technicians found it, a sealed evidence box from the original homicide investigation. The box had remained untouched since January. The seal was intact. The storage logs were perfect. Everything appeared normal until they opened it. Inside was a photograph, not listed in any inventory, not mentioned in any report, not recorded anywhere. A photograph that shouldn't have existed. It showed Jonathan Reed standing beside Daniel Mercer and Victor Kane, all 3 men together. The image had been taken just 6 months before Jonathan's death. Ryan stared at the photograph for a long time, because 3 impossible things were now true. Daniel Mercer was supposed to be dead. Victor Kane was supposed to be missing. Jonathan Reed was supposed to be an ordinary victim. Yet somehow all 3 had been connected. For years, the investigation accelerated. Phone records, financial records, travel histories. Every path pointed toward the same conclusion. The 3 men had been conducting a private investigation, not into murders, not into fraud, into identity. Specifically, cases involving people who legally died but continued operating under new identities. The network stretched across multiple states. Dozens of names, millions of dollars, years of activity. And then detectives discovered why Jonathan had been killed. 6 weeks before his death, he had sent a file to a journalist. The file never arrived. It vanished during transmission. No copy was ever recovered. But investigators found a draft message attached to it. Only one sentence survived. "If this reaches you, they're using the dead." Nobody knew exactly what he meant. But the theory became clear. Someone had built a system that exploited deceased identities, bank accounts, property ownership, corporate registrations, financial movement. People stopped looking for the dead, which made them useful. Jonathan had gotten too close, and then he died. The case appeared solved, at least psychologically. There was finally motive. There was finally context. Then the final discovery arrived and destroyed everything investigators thought they understood. A forensic auditor reviewing archived footage noticed something unusual. 3 days after Jonathan Reed's death, someone accessed the evidence warehouse. Legally, using authorized credentials. The employee entered one aisle, opened one cabinet, removed one box, and remained off camera for 11 minutes. Nothing unusual, except for one detail. The employee had died 2 years earlier. The access credential belonged to a retired evidence supervisor named Harold Finch. Official records confirmed Harold Finch was dead, yet his credentials had been used. The footage quality was poor. The face couldn't be identified. But investigators could determine one thing. Whoever accessed the warehouse knew exactly where Jonathan's evidence was stored. That discovery changed the meaning of the fingerprint. The fingerprint wasn't the mystery. It was the message. Someone had deliberately moved Jonathan's print from one sealed case into another, not to hide evidence, to reveal it, to make investigators reopen the files, to force someone to notice the connection. And it worked. Without the fingerprint, nobody would have discovered the storage unit. Nobody would have connected Daniel Mercer. Nobody would have found Victor Kane. Nobody would have reopened Jonathan's case. The impossible fingerprint had been a breadcrumb, left by someone still inside the system, someone who wanted detectives to follow it. The question was why. That answer never came. No arrests were made. No mastermind was identified. The network Jonathan had been investigating was never fully exposed. Pieces emerged, fragments surfaced, but the complete picture remained hidden. Years later, the official conclusion remained frustratingly simple. Jonathan Reed's homicide investigation was reopened. The fingerprint anomaly was classified as intentional evidence manipulation. The connected cases remained active, and the person who planted the fingerprint was never found. But one detail still troubles investigators. The original fingerprint report showed a match confidence of 99.98%, not 100%. A junior analyst reviewing the case years later discovered why. There was a second partial match, a weaker one, buried deep in the system. A second person shared enough characteristics to trigger a statistical overlap. That person's name appeared only once in the records. No photograph, no address, no known identity. Just a note attached to the file. Status: deceased. The date of death? 3 months after the fingerprint appeared. And the cause of death? Officially unknown. To this day, investigators cannot explain who left the fingerprint. They cannot explain who moved the evidence. And they cannot explain why every person connected to the mystery eventually disappeared, died, or vanished from official records. What they do know is this: a dead man's fingerprint appeared inside sealed evidence 8 months after he died. Investigators spent years trying to understand how it happened. In the end, the fingerprint wasn't proving a dead man had returned. It was proving that someone was still hiding behind the dead. And whoever that person was, they knew exactly how to remain invisible.